Ladies and gentlemen, we stand, each of us, at a crossroads between who we think we are and who we are destined to become. The modern individual is surrounded by distractions, overwhelmed by images of what they should be, yet haunted by the silent whisper of what they could be. In this lecture, we shall journey inward to the realms of the unconscious, the shadow, the archetypes, and the soul's deep yearning for wholeness. Carl Gustav Jung did not offer mere theories. He offered a map of the psyche, a path to individuation, the process of becoming your true self. This is not self-improvement, this is self-confrontation. It is the soul's pilgrimage through doubt, conflict, myth, and meaning. Today, you are invited to walk that path, not toward perfection, but toward integration. Not toward ego inflation, but toward sacred authenticity. So let us begin not with answers, but with courage, the concept of individuation, as proposed by Carl Gustav Jung, is perhaps one of the most profound and transformative psychological ideas of the 20th century. Unlike many systems of thought that focus on adaptation or conformity to external norms, individuation is a deeply inward journey. It is not about becoming a better version of what society demands, nor is it merely about self-improvement in the traditional sense. Individuation is about becoming whole. It is the lifelong process of integrating all parts of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, into a coherent and authentic sense of self. Jung believed that within each human being exists a blueprint of wholeness, a self that encompasses far more than the ego. This self is not constructed, it is discovered. It is there, waiting to be uncovered beneath the layers of masks, fears, projections, and societal conditioning that accumulate over time. The journey of individuation begins with a rupture, a moment where the old sense of identity begins to crack under the weight of inner contradictions or life's unexpected upheavals. For some, it might be a crisis of meaning. For others, a deep feeling of emptiness despite outward success. These moments are not symptoms to be avoided, but invitations to begin the process of inner exploration. In Jung's model, the ego, the conscious I, is only one part of the psyche. It is the center of consciousness, but not the center of the entire personality. The self, which contains the totality of the conscious and unconscious, is the true center. The process of individuation, then, is a movement from ego-centered living toward alignment with the self. It requires the ego to relinquish its illusion of control and to enter into dialogue with the unconscious. This dialogue often begins through dreams, symbols, intuitions, and even life events that seem charged with significance. These communications from the unconscious must not be dismissed. They are guideposts, metaphors, and messages meant to draw the ego into relationship with the deeper layers of the psyche. Jung emphasized that this process cannot be rushed or forced. It unfolds organically, much like a seed growing into a tree, according to the inner laws of the soul. Each person's path is unique, and yet the underlying structures, the archetypes, are shared across humanity. These archetypes, such as the hero, the mother, the wise old man, and the trickster, shape the narrative of our lives whether we are conscious of them or not. The early stages of individuation often involve a confrontation with the shadow. This is the part of ourselves that we have rejected, denied, or repressed. The shadow is not evil in itself. Rather, it contains aspects of ourselves that do not fit the image we have constructed. It might include aggression, desire, envy, selfishness, vulnerability, or even our own creative potential. By projecting the shadow onto others, we avoid facing these elements within ourselves. Individuation demands that we reclaim these projections, that we own the disowned parts of the psyche. This is not easy work. It requires humility, courage, and radical honesty. But it is essential, for without integration of the shadow, we remain fragmented and bound by inner conflict. As we move further along the path, the archetypal figures of the anima and animus may begin to emerge. These are the inner images of the opposite gender that live within every person. For a man, the anima represents his unconscious feminine aspects. For a woman, the animus represents her unconscious masculine aspects. These figures appear in dreams, fantasies, and relationships. They must be engaged, understood, and integrated, for they hold the keys to emotional depth, creativity, and spiritual insight. When unintegrated, the anima or animus may distort our relationships and our understanding of ourselves. When integrated, they become bridges to the self. The role of the persona must also be examined. The persona is the mask we wear in society, the roles we play, the identities we adopt to function in the outer world. While the persona is necessary for social interaction, it can become a prison if we mistake it for our true self. Individuation calls us to see through the persona, to realize that we are more than our profession, our status, our roles. This often leads to a stripping away, a period of disorientation as old identities dissolve, but this is not regression, it is purification. It is the necessary dismantling that precedes genuine self-discovery. Throughout the individuation journey, symbols play a central role. Jung saw the psyche as symbolic by nature. Symbols are not just signs. They are living realities that point to something beyond the rational mind. They appear in dreams, myths, art, and religious rituals. They help the conscious mind make contact with the unconscious. A symbol cannot be fully explained or reduced to a single meaning. It opens the soul to mystery, to depth, to meaning that transcends logic. Working with symbols through active imagination, dream interpretation, and creative expression allows the psyche to unfold naturally and in alignment with its inner truth. Another essential component of individuation is the experience of synchronicity. These are meaningful coincidences that defy causal explanation, moments when the outer world reflects the inner world with uncanny precision. Jung saw synchronicity as evidence that the psyche and the cosmos are interwoven, that the process of individuation is not merely a personal journey, but a sacred unfolding within a larger, interconnected reality. Such moments of synchronicity often mark turning points in the individuation process. They affirm that we are on the right path, that the self is guiding us toward wholeness. Importantly, individuation does not lead to perfection in the moral or social sense. It leads to authenticity. It is not about becoming better than others, but about becoming more fully ourselves. Jung warned that the goal is not to eliminate conflict, but to hold opposites in creative tension. The union of opposites, such as love and power, light and dark, masculine and feminine, creates psychic wholeness. The individuated person is not free from suffering, but has found a deeper meaning in that suffering. They are not without flaws, but they are no longer at war with themselves. The process of individuation also has a deeply spiritual dimension. Jung's work was influenced by Christian mysticism, alchemy, Eastern philosophy, and Gnosticism. He saw the self as a divine archetype, a symbol of God within. Thus, individuation is not only psychological, but also spiritual. It is the unfolding of the divine potential in the human soul. It is the return to center, the alignment of the human will with the deeper, sacred order. The individuated person becomes a vessel of transformation not only for themselves but for the world around them. Their very presence has weight, depth, and resonance. They embody a truth that cannot be taught, only discovered. The role of the shadow in Jungian psychology is perhaps one of the most crucial and difficult aspects of the individuation process. Carl Jung defined the shadow as the unconscious part of the psyche that contains everything the ego refuses to acknowledge about itself. These are the traits, impulses, emotions, and tendencies that we reject, suppress, or deny, often because they conflict with our personal values, social expectations, or self-image. The shadow is not inherently negative or evil, although it is often perceived that way. It contains all that we disown, not only our darker impulses like rage, envy, and deceit, but also repressed creative potential, emotional vulnerability, untapped talents, and intuitive wisdom. In Jung's understanding, the shadow represents the other within us, the aspects of our own nature we do not wish to see, yet which hold immense transformative power when confronted and integrated consciously. From a psychological perspective, the shadow forms early in childhood. As we grow and are taught what is acceptable or unacceptable, good or bad, we naturally begin to split off parts of our emotional and behavioral spectrum. We internalize cultural and parental expectations, and whatever does not fit the mold we are expected to conform to becomes hidden in the unconscious. A child who is punished for expressing anger may come to see anger as dangerous or shameful, repressing it into the shadow. A person raised in a family or society that discourages emotional vulnerability might bury their capacity for softness, replacing it with a false identity of toughness. Over time, these disowned parts begin to take on a life of their own in the unconscious, often influencing our behavior in subtle, compulsive, and sometimes destructive ways. We may find ourselves overreacting, projecting, or falling into repeated patterns without fully understanding why. Projection is a central mechanism through which the shadow operates. When we refuse to acknowledge a part of ourselves, we tend to see it in others. We project our denied traits onto friends, partners, co-workers, political figures, or even strangers. The things that trigger us most deeply in others are often mirrors of our own unresolved shadow content. This does not mean that everyone we dislike reflects something within us directly, but it does mean that our emotional responses often point us to something unacknowledged in our own psyche. For example, a person who prides themselves on being selfless might feel intense judgment towards someone they perceive as selfish, without realizing that they, too, have repressed selfish desires and unmet needs. Projection allows us to avoid confronting these aspects directly, but it also keeps us trapped in illusion and conflict. Jung emphasized that the shadow must be integrated, not eliminated. It is not a matter of destroying the parts we dislike, but of recognizing them, accepting them, and learning to relate to them in a conscious way. Shadow integration begins with self-observation and emotional honesty. It involves the willingness to face uncomfortable truths about ourselves without judgment. Dreams often provide a gateway into shadow material. Nightmares, dark figures, chaotic scenes, or emotionally charged dream images can all point to aspects of the shadow seeking conscious recognition. In active imagination, another Jungian technique, we engage in dialogue with these inner figures, allowing the unconscious to speak and express what has long been buried. Through these methods, we begin to bridge the gap between conscious identity and unconscious content. The process of confronting the shadow is often accompanied by intense resistance. The ego does not easily relinquish its image of superiority, virtue, or innocence. Many people resist shadow work because it threatens their self-concept. It is far easier to believe in one's own goodness or victimhood than to admit to darker motivations, jealousy, arrogance, or hidden aggression. Yet Jung insisted that real maturity begins when we are willing to see the whole of ourselves. Without this work, we remain psychologically divided, and our lives become a battleground of inner contradiction. We may act out our shadow unconsciously, sabotaging relationships, repeating harmful patterns, or attracting toxic dynamics that reflect our inner fragmentation. One of the most important insights in Jungian thought is that the shadow is not merely personal, but also collective. Just as individuals carry personal shadows, societies carry collective shadows: cultural, racial, national, and religious projections that result in prejudice, scapegoating, and systemic violence. Wars, oppression, and ideological conflicts are often fueled by a refusal to own the shadow at the collective level. When a group sees itself as morally superior and projects all evil onto an enemy, it is enacting a shadow dynamic on a grand scale. Jung warned that unless the individual confronts and integrates their own shadow, they are easily manipulated by collective forces. This makes shadow work not only a personal imperative, but a moral and cultural responsibility. There is also an empowering dimension to the shadow. Within the darkness lies a great reservoir of energy, passion, and creativity. When we reclaim these rejected parts, we regain access to our vitality. The very qualities we once feared or denied can become sources of strength. Anger, when integrated, becomes assertiveness and clarity. Envy can reveal our deepest longings. Repressed sensuality can blossom into a richer, fuller experience of embodiment. The integration of the shadow leads to a more authentic, multidimensional self. We become less reactive, more self-aware, and capable of engaging with others in a more compassionate and grounded way. Relationships deepen because we are no longer unconsciously projecting our inner conflicts onto others. We learn to take responsibility for our emotions and behaviors, and we begin to see others not as enemies or saviors, but as fellow travelers with their own shadows to face. Jung often spoke of the shadow as the doorway to the self. Without descending into the depths, we cannot rise into wholeness. The alchemical process of transformation, the Negredo stage, or blackening, symbolizes this necessary descent. It is the stage of confusion, chaos, and darkness that precedes clarity and renewal. Many spiritual and mythological traditions echo this truth. The hero must enter the underworld, the initiate must pass through the night, the soul must face the dragon. Shadow work is the modern psychological equivalent of this descent. It is the confrontation with the unconscious in its raw, unrefined form, yet it is also the beginning of liberation. In practical terms, engaging the shadow requires tools, practices, and a supportive environment. Therapy, particularly Jungian analysis, provides a structured space for this kind of deep work. Journaling, dream work, creative expression, meditation, and shadow dialogues are accessible practices that can be used outside of therapy to explore unconscious material. Honest feedback from trusted friends or mentors can also be invaluable, as long as the intention is self-discovery rather than blame. The key is to cultivate a stance of curiosity rather than judgment. The shadow is not an enemy to be vanquished, but a teacher to be understood. The more we face the shadow, the less power it has over us. We no longer need to hide behind masks or pretend to be something we are not. Instead, we begin to embody a fuller, richer sense of self, one that includes contradictions, paradoxes, and complexity. We find ourselves less controlled by compulsions and more guided by inner truth. We begin to live in alignment with the deeper self, no longer fragmented, but increasingly whole. The process is never finished. The shadow is always with us, evolving as we evolve, but each step we take toward it is a step toward freedom, authenticity, and inner peace. Archetypes and the collective unconscious are foundational elements in Carl Jung's theory of the psyche, offering a deep and universal framework through which we can understand human experience across cultures, time periods, and individual lives. Jung observed that beyond the personal unconscious, which is shaped by personal memories, experiences, and trauma, there exists a deeper, universal layer of the unconscious mind by all human beings. He called this the collective unconscious, a repository of instinctual patterns, images, and psychic structures that are inherited rather than acquired. Within this collective unconscious reside the archetypes, primordial, symbolic forms that shape human perception, behavior, and development. Archetypes are not fixed images, but dynamic forces that give rise to myth, dream, ritual, art, and the recurring themes we find in literature, religion, and everyday life. They are the psychological blueprints behind the scenes, silently organizing our inner and outer worlds. Archetypes manifest in dreams, visions, stories, and symbolic experiences, often appearing during moments of psychological transition, crisis, or transformation. They are felt rather than thought, experienced as numinous or emotionally charged images that resonate on a level beyond logic. The hero, the mother, the trickster, the wise old man, the child, and the shadow of the most well-known archetypes. In Jung's framework, each of these figures embodies a set of tendencies, emotions, and inner narratives that appear repeatedly across cultures and epochs. The universality of these archetypes suggests that they are not learned, but innate, psychic inheritance built into the structure of the human mind. For Jung, this explained why people from vastly different backgrounds could have similar dream symbols, spiritual visions, or mythological themes. The hero archetype, for example, represents the part of us that seeks to grow, to confront challenges, and to transform. In mythology, the hero ventures into the unknown, faces trials, encounters helpers and enemies, and returns with a boon or new wisdom. Psychologically, this is mirrored in the individual's journey through life, leaving childhood, facing conflict, overcoming inner and outer obstacles, and returning with a deeper understanding of self. The hero is not limited to a specific gender or age. It is a pattern of energy that we all engage with during various stages of our life. In therapy, this archetype often emerges when a person begins to take responsibility for their growth, facing fears and embracing change. The mother archetype, another powerful figure, represents nourishment, care, protection, but also engulfment, control, and unconscious influence. It may appear in dreams as a literal mother, a goddess, a cave, the earth, or water. The positive aspect of the mother is life-giving and nurturing. The negative aspect can be smothering, devouring, or possessive. Our early relationship with our actual mother or maternal figure often colors our perception of this archetype, but the archetype itself is transpersonal. It shapes how we relate to dependency, emotional intimacy, creativity, and the inner feminine. Men and women alike carry the mother archetype within them, influencing how they care for others and how they care for themselves. The wise old man or wise woman archetype embodies inner wisdom, guidance, clarity, and transcendence. It often appears in dreams as a teacher, elder, priest, magician, or mystical figure offering insight. This archetype represents the self's guidance function, the part of the psyche that sees beyond the ego's limitations and offers perspective. In times of confusion, the wise archetype may appear to guide the individual through the chaos of transformation. It is not the ego's wisdom, but the deeper intelligence of the soul, speaking through symbol and intuition. Often, individuals undergoing intense life changes will experience dreams or synchronistic events where this archetype makes itself known, suggesting a deeper path through what appears to be random suffering or disorder. The trickster archetype is another essential figure in Jungian thought. Playful, disruptive, chaotic, and paradoxical, the trickster serves to undermine certainty and challenge assumptions. In mythology, the trickster is seen in figures like Loki, Hermes, Coyote, or the Fool. Psychologically, it represents the part of us that rebels, breaks rules, mocks convention, and disrupts the status quo. While often uncomfortable and unpredictable, the trickster serves a critical role in individuation. It forces the ego to confront its rigidity, to laugh at itself, to release control, and to discover freedom in uncertainty. Without the trickster, transformation would be static and overly serious. With it, the journey gains spontaneity, creativity, and often necessary chaos. Archetypes, though deeply embedded in the unconscious, become conscious through symbolic expression. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of dreams, art, myths, and rituals in understanding the psyche. When an archetype surfaces, it brings with it a tidal wave of emotion and symbolic meaning. Jung called this experience numinous charged. With energy that transcends the ordinary, it is not merely intellectual but deeply felt. These moments often mark psychological turning points, the emergence of an inner guide, the confrontation with death, the reunion with the inner child, or the recognition of the divine within. Archetypes do not impose themselves arbitrarily. They emerge when the psyche is ready for growth, often when the ego is destabilized and open to new integration. The collective unconscious does not operate in opposition to individuality, but serves as the deeper matrix from which true individuality arises. This may seem paradoxical. How can we become our unique self by connecting with universal patterns? Yet Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming one's true self, requires a conscious engagement with the archetypal world. By recognizing and integrating these inner figures, we align with the deeper truth of who we are. The self, in Jungian thought, is itself an archetype, the totality of the psyche, the organizing principle that seeks to unite conscious and unconscious, ego and archetype, in a dynamic whole. Dreams that depict mandalas, centers, circles, or sacred space often point to the emergence of the self-archetype, signaling a stage of deep integration. Archetypes do not dictate fate, but they do offer pathways. When we are unconscious of them, we are often ruled by them. We may become possessed by an archetype, over-identified with the hero, lost in the shadow, consumed by the mother, inflated by the wise man. But when we recognize these energies for what they are, we can enter into relationship with them, neither rejecting nor being overtaken by them. This is the work of conscious living. We do not eradicate archetypes, for they are part of our psychic structure. We dance with them, wrestle with them, and invite them to speak. This creates depth, meaning, and authenticity. In therapy, archetypal analysis helps individuals understand recurring patterns in their lives, recurring relationship dynamics, emotional blocks, and spiritual questions. By recognizing the archetype behind a personal experience, one begins to see that their suffering is not isolated but meaningful. A woman in a controlling relationship may be caught in the negative mother archetype. A man paralyzed by indecision may be under the influence of an unintegrated child. A person obsessed with perfection might be inflating the hero. Understanding these patterns opens the door to transformation, allowing the person to reclaim their agency, integrate disowned energies, and reframe their story within a larger psychological and mythological context. The importance of archetypes and the collective unconscious lies in their capacity to reconnect us with something ancient, vast, and wise within ourselves. In a world increasingly focused on the surface, on speed, utility, and rationality, Jung's work invites us to return to symbol, to story, to soul. Archetypes offer us a vocabulary for inner life, a map through chaos, and a bridge between the personal and the universal. They remind us that we are not isolated egos floating in a meaningless void, but participants in an ancient psychological inheritance. ChatGPT said, "The persona, in Carl Jung's psychology, is the mask we wear in the world, the role we adopt to function in society and be accepted by others. It is not our true self, but a social identity crafted through interaction with cultural expectations, family norms, educational systems, and personal ambitions." The word persona itself comes from the Latin for mask, originally used in Greek and Roman theater to signify the character being played. In Jungian terms, the persona is a psychological mask, one that allows the ego to present itself in a way that is socially acceptable, coherent, and beneficial within a given cultural or relational context, while the persona serves a necessary function in helping us adapt and communicate in society. The danger lies in becoming overly identified with it, mistaking the mask for the face beneath it, the role for the essence. From a developmental standpoint, the persona begins to form early in life. As a child learns what behavior gains approval and what invites disapproval, they begin to adopt behaviors, attitudes, and expressions that are rewarded. A child praised for being obedient may internalize the image of the good boy or good girl. A young person admired for their intelligence may craft a persona of the smart one, suppressing emotional or creative parts of themselves that do not fit that image. Over time, the original, raw self becomes shaped by external reinforcement, and a social identity crystallizes. This identity, while useful, can also become rigid, suffocating, or disconnected from deeper psychological truth. The more we depend on the persona for our sense of self, the further we drift from our inner authenticity. In modern society, where branding, performance, and curated self-presentation dominate interpersonal and digital interaction, the risk of persona inflation is significant. People often begin to over-identify with their professional roles, social, media presence, relationship labels, or cultural archetypes. The doctor begins to believe they are the healer at all times. The influencer believes they are the image they project. The parent sees themselves only through the lens of their children's success. The deeper self, the self in Jungian terms, gets lost behind layers of adaptation. This disconnection can lead to feelings of emptiness, depression, anxiety, or meaninglessness. The life may look successful from the outside, yet feel profoundly unfulfilling from within. Jung emphasized that the persona is not to be destroyed, but to be made conscious. It is a necessary interface between the individual and society. Without it, we would have no ability to relate, communicate, or participate in the social world. The problem arises when the persona becomes autonomous, when it controls the ego rather than serving it. When we mistake our roles for our essence, we live inauthentically. The process of individuation, becoming one's true self, requires the deconstruction of the persona, a stripping away of false identities so that the deeper, more integrated self can emerge. This is often a painful but liberating process. The breakdown of the persona, it begins with inner conflict. A person may feel divided, as if living two lives, one public and one private. They may sense that the image they present to the world no longer reflects what they truly feel or value. This dissonance creates psychological tension, prompting questions like, who am I really? What do I want beyond what is expected of me? What parts of myself have I lost or hidden to maintain this role? These questions signal the beginning of individuation. The ego begins to loosen its grip on the persona and starts turning inward toward the unconscious, seeking contact with the deeper self. Dreams often reflect this transition. The persona may appear as a uniform, a mask, or a stage performance, sometimes cracking or falling away in symbolic fashion. In waking life, individuals may feel drawn to new activities, people, or ideas that conflict with their established identity. A successful executive may begin to explore art or spirituality. A lifelong caregiver may feel the need to express anger or assert independence. These shifts can be confusing, especially if the persona has brought social success. The fear of judgment, loss, or disapproval can make individuals cling to their persona, even as it suffocates them. But the soul, once awakened, resists being silenced. Relationships are deeply impacted by the persona. When two people relate to each other from their personas, the relationship remains surface level, functional, and often fragile. Real intimacy requires the courage to move beyond the mask, to show vulnerability, contradiction, and depth. The more a person is trapped in their persona, the harder it is to form genuine connections. They may feel isolated despite being surrounded by others, performative despite being praised, or unfulfilled despite achieving their goals. True connection begins when the mask is lowered and the authentic self begins to emerge. The process of differentiating the self from the persona is not about rebellion or radical nonconformity. It is about authenticity, living from the inside out rather than the outside in. Jung believed that the self, the archetype of wholeness, cannot be realized unless the individual consciously confronts the artificiality of the persona. This does not mean rejecting social roles entirely, but playing them consciously rather than being possessed by them. A conscious persona becomes a tool of expression, not a prison of identity. The difference is subtle but profound. The actor who knows they are acting can return to themselves after the performance. The actor who forgets it is a performance becomes lost in the role. The risk of persona disintegration is existential. When the persona collapses through job loss, divorce, crisis, or spiritual awakening, the individual may face a dark night of the soul. They may feel as though they no longer know who they are or what they believe. This is not regression, but an opportunity. The fall of the persona makes space for the emergence of something deeper, more essential, and more enduring. Jung called this process a return to the self. It is often marked by psychological disorientation, but also by a deepening of soul, meaning, and purpose. Symbols and rituals can aid in this transition. In traditional societies, rites of passage helped individuals shed one identity and assume another. Modern culture often lacks such structures, making psychological transitions more chaotic. Jungian therapy seeks to provide a symbolic container for this work, helping individuals examine their persona, explore their unconscious, and reconstruct a life rooted in wholeness rather than performance. Through dream analysis, active imagination, and dialogue, the client begins to reclaim lost aspects of themselves, eventually forming a new persona that reflects, rather than hides, the inner truth. Art, literature, and mythology also offer mirrors for persona exploration. Characters who wear masks, who lead double lives, who undergo identity crises, often depict the tension between persona and self. The story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, for example, dramatizes what happens when the persona represses the shadow. The myth of Narcissus warns of the dangers of over-identifying with one's image. These stories remind us that the persona, while necessary, can become a trap if we forget that it is not the whole of who we are. In Jung's view, the most dangerous personas are those that appear flawless, virtuous, or untouchable. These masks often conceal deep insecurity, disconnection, or unconscious inflation. The more perfect the mask, the more likely it is compensating for an unlived or denied aspect of the self. The work of integration requires that we not only see the mask for what it is, but also learn to hold it lightly, to wear it with awareness and flexibility. We can then move through the world with authenticity, adapting to various roles without losing contact with the soul beneath them. Ultimately, the persona is not the enemy. It becomes a problem only when it is unconscious, rigid, or mistaken for the self. When we become aware of it, question it, and reshape it in alignment with inner truth, it can serve as a bridge between the inner world and outer life. We can navigate the demands of society while staying rooted in the deeper currents of our being. This conscious relationship to the persona marks a critical step in the journey toward individuation and psychological wholeness. Dreams play a central role in Jungian psychology as pathways to the unconscious and essential tools in the journey toward self-understanding and individuation. Carl Jung viewed dreams not as meaningless byproducts of random neural activity, but as deeply intelligent communications from the psyche. To Jung, the unconscious is not a chaotic realm to be feared, but a vast, symbolic language that speaks through images, stories, and emotional impressions. Dreams are its primary medium of expression. Each night, as we sleep, the psyche produces narratives woven from the threads of daily life, archetypal symbols, unresolved emotions, and future possibilities. These dream messages are not coded in logical language, but in metaphor and image. To understand a dream is to understand the language of the soul, and for Jung, to ignore our dreams is to turn away from the very guidance we need to become whole. Dreams serve as a mirror, reflecting aspects of the dreamer's inner life that are often hidden from waking awareness. These aspects might include unconscious desires, repressed emotions, shadow content, or neglected potential. While the ego operates during waking life, managing external demands and maintaining a coherent sense of identity, dreams bypass the ego's control and reveal truths that may be difficult to face consciously. The dream does not flatter or deceive. It confronts. It challenges the assumptions of the waking self and brings forward that which seeks recognition and integration. Whether through strange imagery, emotional intensity, or bizarre juxtapositions, dreams provide symbols that require interpretation but hold transformative potential when taken seriously. In Jungian analysis, dreams are not interpreted according to fixed meanings or general dictionaries of symbols. Jung believed that dream interpretation must be personal and contextual, respecting the unique psyche of the dreamer. A snake in one person's dream may symbolize healing and transformation, while in another's it may represent fear and danger. The meaning emerges through dialogue with the unconscious, often facilitated by a therapist or deep introspection. Jung encouraged active imagination, a process of entering into the dream world consciously, interacting with its figures, and allowing its narrative to continue in waking life. Through this method, the symbols of the dream are given space to unfold and reveal their psychological significance. Dreams often introduce figures that represent archetypes from the collective unconscious: the wise old man, the great mother, the child, the hero, the trickster. These figures may appear in dreams not as literal representations, but as symbolic energies within the psyche. When the dream presents a mentor, a threatening figure, a lost child, or a magical animal, it is offering insight into the current state of the dreamer's internal world. A terrifying figure may be the shadow making itself known. A nurturing presence may indicate the emergence of the inner mother. A labyrinthine journey may reflect the process of individuation itself, winding through the layers of the unconscious in search of the self. Each dream is a story unfolding in real time, rich with mythological parallels and psychological depth. Recurring dreams are particularly significant in Jungian thought. When the unconscious repeats a message, it suggests that the ego has not yet grasped the importance of what is being communicated. A person who repeatedly dreams of being lost may be confronting the loss of inner direction or identity. Someone who frequently dreams of being chased might be avoiding a truth or fear that must be faced. These dream themes become symbolic warnings or guidance, and when interpreted correctly, they can lead to meaningful transformation. Ignoring such dreams does not dissolve their energy. Instead, the unresolved content often manifests in waking life through emotional disturbances, conflicts, or even physical symptoms. Nightmares, although distressing, are also potent sources of psychological insight. In Jungian psychology, a nightmare is not merely a negative experience to be avoided or suppressed. It is a confrontation with material that the psyche urgently needs to process. The more terrifying the dream, the more likely it holds a truth the ego is resisting. A dream of death, for instance, may symbolize the end of a phase of life, the death of an identity, or the transformation required to move forward. Monsters, demons, or disasters may represent repressed fears or aspects of the shadow. When approached with courage and curiosity, these images become allies rather than enemies, revealing parts of the self that have been cut off or misunderstood. Jung placed special emphasis on compensatory dreams, those that balance the one-sidedness of the conscious mind. If a person sees themselves as overly rational or successful, the dream may present them in a vulnerable or chaotic state to restore psychological equilibrium. If someone lives in denial of their emotional world, the dream might flood them with emotion. The unconscious seeks balance, and dreams are its way of correcting psychological imbalances and restoring wholeness. This is not punishment, but a form of inner healing. The dream serves the process of individuation by pushing the dreamer to confront and integrate what they have neglected. Dreams also play a role in spiritual development. Jung observed that many dreams contain religious or numinous symbols: crosses, mandalas, temples, sacred animals, or mysterious figures. These images do not necessarily refer to dogmatic religion, but to the inner experience of the divine, the self, or the numinous dimension of life. Jung believed that such dreams mark moments of deep transformation, where the ego begins to make contact with the self the organizing principle of the psyche and the goal of individuation. The dream does not preach, but it reveals. It draws the dreamer toward mystery, inviting them to step beyond ego and into the deeper rhythms of the soul. Symbols in dreams are multivalent, meaning they carry many layers of meaning. A house may represent the psyche, with each room symbolizing a different aspect of consciousness. Water may symbolize emotion, the unconscious, or purification. Animals may carry instinctual wisdom. The act of flying could signify liberation or spiritual transcendence. Fire might represent destruction, passion, or purification. These symbols cannot be reduced to a single definition. They must be explored in the context of the dreamer's life, emotional state, and psychological development. In this way, dream analysis becomes a collaborative exploration between the conscious mind and the unconscious, a sacred dialogue rather than a mechanical decoding. The dream, when honored and interpreted, becomes a compass. It shows where the ego is stuck, where the soul longs to go, and what aspects of the self need attention. It can reveal the consequences of current choices, the wounds that need healing, and the potential that remains untapped. It can also act as a rehearsal for real life, allowing the psyche to experiment with possibilities, confront dangers symbolically, and prepare for change. Jungian therapy often begins with a dream, for the dream provides a starting point that bypasses defenses and goes straight to the truth. In Jung's own life, dreams were not only a subject of study, but a source of personal revelation. His famous Red Book chronicles his engagement with his own unconscious through dreams, visions, and active imagination. He understood that the psyche is alive, autonomous, and profoundly intelligent. To engage with it through dreams is to engage with the depths of human nature itself. Jung saw dreams as democratic, available to all people regardless of education, background, or belief system. They are the voice of the inner world, always speaking, always guiding. If only we are willing to listen. Through dreams, the unconscious reaches across the veil of sleep to offer its wisdom, its warnings, and its mysterious gifts. They are the oldest form of inner guidance, as ancient as humanity itself, speaking the language of symbols long before words were born. ChatGPT said, "The anima and animus are central concepts in Carl Jung's analytical psychology, representing the unconscious feminine side in men and the unconscious masculine side in women. These archetypal figures are not merely gendered roles, but dynamic energies that exist within every individual, influencing emotions, relationships, creativity, and spiritual development." Jung believed that psychic wholeness requires the integration of both masculine and feminine principles within the psyche. The anima and animus are bridges to the unconscious, often appearing in dreams, fantasies, projections, and intense relational dynamics. They are among the most powerful archetypes because they directly shape how we relate not only to others, but to ourselves. Their influence can be uplifting or destructive, conscious or unconscious, depending on whether they are integrated or projected outward. The anima in a man typically begins as an unconscious, emotional, and often idealized image of womanhood. It may manifest in dreams as a mysterious woman, a seductive figure, a nurturing mother, or a spiritual guide. At first, the anima is often projected onto women in the man's life partners, friends, strangers, leading to romantic idealization or deep emotional reactions that seem disproportionate to the actual person. This projection can create powerful attachments, obsessions, or disillusionments when reality fails to match the inner image. The man may feel drawn to women not as they truly are, but as carriers of his own disowned emotional life, intuition, sensitivity, or inner creativity. The anima thus serves as both a mirror and a magnet, pulling the man into emotional complexity and psychological depth, while also revealing his own neglected inner world. Similarly, the animus in a woman appears as the unconscious masculine within her psyche. It may be represented in dreams by authoritative men, heroes, fathers, spiritual figures, or even tyrants. Like the anima, the animus is first projected onto men in her life, shaping her expectations, desires, and judgments. A woman under the influence of a negative animus projection may feel dominated by critical inner voices, relentless perfectionism, or a compulsion to argue or control. In contrast, the positive animus can be a source of strength, assertiveness, clarity, and intellectual power. The animus shapes how a woman thinks, speaks, and acts with authority, and when integrated, it becomes a powerful ally in achieving balance between receptivity and agency. The development of the anima or animus follows a progressive path. In early stages, the anima may appear as an object of erotic fascination or fantasy, while the animus may appear as a rigid voice of societal expectations or internalized judgment. As individuation proceeds and consciousness expands, these figures evolve. The man begins to see women not through the lens of his projections, but as individuals, and the anima becomes more internalized, emerging as a source of intuition, emotional depth, and creative inspiration. The woman begins to withdraw the animus projection from men and develops her own inner authority, rational thinking, and willpower. The transformation of these archetypes involves a gradual shift from projection to integration, from outer fixation to inner realization. Dreams are rich territory for anima and animus imagery. A man may dream of rescuing or being rescued by a mysterious woman, a symbol of his evolving relationship with his emotional life. She may appear as a seductress, a guide, or a mystical figure leading him into unknown realms of the unconscious. A woman may dream of debating, confronting, or receiving instruction from a series of men who each reflect aspects of her inner masculinity ranging from the aggressive to the wise. Each dream is an invitation to examine how these figures are playing out in waking life, and how the individual is relating to the energies they represent. These dreams often arrive during periods of emotional upheaval, transition, or spiritual seeking, pointing toward the deeper work of inner union. Romantic relationships are often the stage where the anima and animus express themselves most dramatically. We are drawn to others not just for who they are, but because they carry unconscious projections of our inner opposite. This is why relationships can be intoxicating, confusing, and transformative. Falling in love often involves the projection of the anima or animus onto the partner, leading to an idealized and often unrealistic view of the other. Over time, as the projection begins to fade, disappointment or conflict can arise. This is not a sign that the relationship has failed, but an opportunity for deeper connection both with the partner and with the inner self. When projections are withdrawn, genuine intimacy becomes possible. The other is no longer seen as a symbol, but as a person. The withdrawal of projections is a painful but necessary part of individuation. It requires humility and psychological insight. It means recognizing that the emotional charge we feel toward another may have more to do with our own psyche than with the actual person. By taking responsibility for our projections, we begin to reclaim the anima or animus, allowing these archetypes to become inner guides rather than outer obsessions. The anima then becomes a source of vision, tenderness, and emotional insight for the man. The animus becomes a channel of truth, courage, and discernment for the woman. These inner figures, once integrated, can serve as powerful allies in the journey towards self-realization. Jung emphasized that full psychological maturity involves the union of opposites within the individual, the reconciliation of masculine and feminine energies both within and between individuals is essential to achieving psychic wholeness. This union is symbolized in alchemy as the conjunctio, the sacred marriage of the king and queen, the sun and moon. It is not a literal merging of gendered traits, but the harmonization of oppositional forces, reason and emotion, action and receptivity, intellect and instinct. This inner union creates a new psychological balance, a centeredness that allows the individual to navigate life with greater resilience, creativity, and authenticity. In many myths and religious traditions, the union of opposites is portrayed through symbolic marriages, dual deities, or balanced pairs. These stories are not mere fables, but representations of a deep psychological truth. The anima and animus are internal mythic figures that echo these ancient motifs. By engaging with them consciously, we participate in a timeless process of transformation. The more we understand and integrate these inner opposites, the less we are dominated by them unconsciously. We no longer seek wholeness in another person, but realize it within ourselves. This changes how we love, how we work, and how we live. In the context of spiritual development, the integration of the anima or animus is often a gateway to deeper connection with the self. Jung described the self as the archetype of wholeness, the center that holds together the tension of opposites. When the anima or animus integrated, they serve as mediators between the ego and the self, helping the individual navigate the unconscious terrain with greater clarity and grace. They open doors to deeper intuition, sacred meaning, and creative expression. They guide the ego towards surrender not as defeat, but as alignment with a deeper order. The challenges of anima and animus integration are profound. These archetypes do not yield easily. They often resist conscious engagement, preferring to operate from the shadows of projection. Their influence is subtle and seductive, and they can easily be mistaken for truth. The key is awareness. The more we become aware of their presence, their patterns, and their effects, the more choice we have in how we relate to them. This awareness is cultivated through reflection, dream work, inner dialogue, creative expression, and relationship dynamics. It is an ongoing process that evolves over time. In Jungian therapy, working with the anima and animus involves exploring dreams, examining relationship patterns, and identifying the inner voices or images that shape emotional and behavioral responses. It also involves creative engagement through writing, drawing, dance, or storytelling to give form to the archetypal energies within. As we give these figures conscious attention, they begin to evolve. The seductive anima becomes the wise muse. The critical animus becomes the discerning guide. This transformation does not eliminate conflict, but it brings coherence to the inner world, allowing the individual to act from a place of integrated awareness rather than compulsion or projection. Synchronicity is one of Carl Jung's most mysterious and captivating contributions to psychology. It refers to meaningful coincidences that occur with no apparent causal connection, yet carry a deep personal significance. These events defy logical explanation but resonate with the soul, often arising during critical moments of transformation, decision, or emotional intensity. Jung describes synchronicity and the causal connecting principle, an alignment between the inner world of the psyche and the outer world of events. To recognize synchronicity is to begin sensing the presence of a deeper order beneath the surface of life, one that connects the individual with the collective unconscious and with the numinous realm of the self. Such experiences awaken a sense of awe, mystery, and sometimes profound guidance, as though life itself is communicating in a symbolic language that transcends logic and speaks directly to the soul. Many people have experienced moments of synchronicity, even if they didn't know the term. You might think of someone you haven't spoken to in years and suddenly receive a message from them. You may be struggling with an inner dilemma and overhear a stranger's conversation that delivers the exact insight you needed. A symbol may recur in dreams, books, and real-life encounters, weaving itself into your attention with uncanny persistence. These moments are not merely coincidences, but are saturated with emotional weight and inner relevance. They seem to break the linear chain of cause and effect, replacing it with a kind of inner logic that reveals an invisible thread connecting mind, soul, and circumstance. Jung believed that these experiences point toward the reality of the unconscious and the active presence of archetypal forces shaping the flow of life from behind the scenes. Psychology of synchronicity intimately linked with the archetypal realm and the process of individuation. Synchronicities often emerge during periods of psychological transition, when the ego is loosening its grip and a deeper sense of self is beginning to emerge. They function as signals or signposts that affirm the soul's direction, offering encouragement, clarity, or a subtle warning. Jung's own life was filled with such moments, and he recounted several cases in which synchronistic events coincided with breakthroughs in therapy or deep shifts in consciousness. He famously collaborated with the physicist Wolfgang Pauli, exploring the relationship between synchronicity and quantum theory, and proposed that psyche and matter are not separate domains, but to aspects of a unified reality he called the unused modus, the one world. When a synchronistic event occurs, it evokes an emotional charge that goes beyond surprise. It is as if the moment carries a hidden message tailored precisely for the individual experiencing it. This psychological resonance is what differentiates synchronicity from mere chance. A falling leaf, a certain phrase in a book, or an animal crossing one's path becomes imbued with symbolic meaning. Jung believed this meaning arises from the connection between the outer event and an inner psychic state. The unconscious uses these moments to reach consciousness through symbols, mirroring the soul's condition in the outer world. Synchronicity becomes a bridge between the conscious and unconscious mind, serving the process of self-realization by awakening deeper awareness of one's life path. Recognition of synchronicity requires a shift in perception. The rational mind tends to dismiss coincidence as random or irrelevant, but the symbolic mind, rooted in myth, dream, and intuition, perceives pattern and meaning where logic sees only chaos. Jung's psychology invites the individual to recover this symbolic mode of consciousness, not as a rejection of reason, but as its complement. In this view, the universe is not inert or mechanical, but responsive and mysterious, capable of reflecting the human soul in poetic and numinous ways. Synchronicity is one of the ways the cosmos speaks, if we are willing to listen with the heart and the imagination in dreams. Synchronicity often presents itself as recurring symbols or parallel events that later unfold in waking life. A person might dream of water, only to encounter floods of emotion or literal rainstorms in the days that follow. A symbol seen in dreams may appear in real life, drawing attention to its archetypal significance. These repetitions are not accidental, but signal a convergence between inner states and outer conditions. The dream prepares the psyche, and reality echoes the message. This rhythmic correspondence between the seen and the unseen invites a more poetic relationship with the world, in which the mundane becomes infused with spiritual depth. In therapy, synchronistic events often mark breakthroughs in healing or insight. A patient working through grief might find an unexpected photo, a bird's call, or a line of poetry that brings catharsis. The therapist's words may echo the dream the patient had the night before. These moments are not planned or orchestrated, but emerge organically, revealing the psyche's mysterious interconnectedness with the field of experience. Jung noted that in moments of synchronicity, time seems to stretch or collapse. One is no longer merely in chronological time, but in what the ancients called kairos, the opportune moment, the time of soul. Jung believed that the ego must learn to be receptive to these moments rather than trying to control them. Receptivity requires a cultivated sensitivity to symbols, intuition, and the flow of the unconscious. This sensitivity can be nurtured through dream work, journaling, art, meditation, and attentive presence. The more attuned one becomes to inner life, the more capable one is of perceiving when the outer world begins to reflect it. Life becomes less of a puzzle to solve and more of a mystery to participate in. Synchronicity becomes a dialogue between the soul and the world. A rhythm of call and response. Certain symbols tend to appear more frequently in synchronistic experiences because they are charged with archetypal energy. Numbers like 1111, animals like owls or serpents, elements like fire or water, these often carry deeper meaning. For example, seeing a snake repeatedly in dreams and waking life might symbolize a transformation process, the shedding of an old self. Hearing the same myth or story in different contexts could indicate that an archetype is at work in one's life. These are not signs to be taken literally or superstitiously, but invitations to reflect, interpret, and engage with the deeper themes of the psyche. Synchronicity also challenges our assumptions about separateness and isolation. It suggests that we are embedded in a network of relationships that includes not only people, but symbols, myths, and even time itself. There is a hidden order that links seemingly unrelated events into a pattern of meaning. This is not the deterministic fate of classical physics, but the subtle guidance of the self orchestrating growth and realization through symbolic echoes in the outer world. To experience synchronicity is to feel oneself woven into the fabric of existence, guided not by control, but by participation in moments of deep crisis or spiritual awakening. Synchronicities often increase in frequency and intensity. It is as though the unconscious accelerates its attempts to break through the ego's defenses, sending signals through dreams, events, and intuitive flashes. These moments can feel disorienting or even magical. The ordinary dissolves into the extraordinary, and the soul glimpses its connection to something larger. Jung was careful to caution against inflation or magical thinking, yet he affirmed the profound psychological and spiritual value of such experiences when held with discernment and humility. Artists, poets, mystics, and shamans have always been aware of synchronicity, though they may have called it by different names. The muse, the omen, the oracle, the vision all point to the soul's encounter with a responsive universe. Jung's genius was in providing a psychological framework for these experiences, grounding them in the structure of the psyche and the process of individuation. He showed that such phenomena, not signs of delusion, but of deep psychic reality. They are invitations to live more symbolically, more consciously, more soulfully. The process of individuation is filled with paradoxes, challenges, and transformations. Along this path, synchronicities are like breadcrumbs left by the self, guiding the ego through the forest of the unconscious. They reveal that life is not a random sequence of events, but a meaningful unfolding that mirrors and supports our inner journey. When we honor these moments, we begin to see the sacred in the everyday, the mythic in the mundane. We realize that we are not separate from the universe, but participants in a vast, unfolding drama whose script is written both within and beyond us. Jung encouraged a respectful engagement with synchronicity, one that blends intuitive openness with psychological awareness. This is not about prediction or control, but about deepening relationship with the self, with others, and with the mysterious field of life itself. Synchronicity is not a tool but a teacher. It teaches us to slow down, to pay attention, to listen beneath the surface. It teaches us that the soul has its own language, and that meaning is not something we manufacture, but something we recognize. It reminds us that the journey to the true self is not traveled alone, but with symbols, dreams, and signs as our quiet companions.